In a shocking and disturbing turn of events, the idyllic facade of Thomas Forrester's redemption arc came crashing down when he was arrested on charges of sexual assault involving a woman in Europe, the once celebrated designer, who had clawed his way back into the good graces of both the Forrester family and the fashion world. After years of scandal and personal missteps, suddenly found himself at the center of a criminal investigation that spanned international borders. The initial reports were met with disbelief by many in Los Angeles, particularly Ridge, who adamantly refused to accept that his son could be guilty of such a heinous crime. Yet beneath the surface of Ridge's denial lay a more complex truth. A father desperate to preserve the legacy of his family and shield the fragile image of a son whose demons had never fully disappeared. The allegations came to light after a young woman in France filed a police report alleging that she had been raped by an American man who matched Thomas's description. The woman, a student studying abroad, claimed she had met the man at a private party in Nice and that she had no recollection of what happened after a few drinks. When she woke up the next morning, she found herself in a hotel room, disoriented, bruised, and alone. Medical records, including a rape kit, confirmed she had been sexually assaulted, and authorities began their investigation. Thomas had already returned to the U.S. by the time an international warrant was issued for his arrest. What followed was a media storm that shook the Forrester family to its core. With paparazzi circling the Forrester estate and reporters digging into every aspect of Thomas's past, speculation grew about the legitimacy of the accusations and the potential political motivations behind such a high-profile arrest warrant. Still, the most damning piece of evidence emerged when the woman's lawyer released a medical report showing clear physical signs of intercourse that aligned with her claim, as well as surveillance footage from the hotel placing Thomas at the scene on the night in question. Despite the mounting evidence, Ridge continued to insist on his son's innocence, dismissing the idea that Thomas could commit such a violent act. Brooke and Steffi were less sure. The family was divided, with some members urging Thomas to cooperate fully and prove his innocence, while others begged him to remain silent and let the legal team handle it. Then came the twist that no one expected. Thomas admitted to sleeping with the woman in question. In a moment of vulnerability, he confessed to Ridge that he had been intoxicated that night, had blacked out portions of the evening, and could not remember the details of the encounter. He insisted that it was not his intention to harm anyone, but that his judgment had been impaired and that he may have crossed a line without realizing it. It was a chilling admission, one that turned the tide of public perception and shattered any lingering illusions about his innocence. Despite Ridge's pleas to keep the matter private, Thomas turned himself in after his legal team advised that cooperation might be the only path to leniency. The court proceedings were swift. French authorities presented compelling evidence and Thomas's own admission worked against him. The victim, visibly shaken but composed, gave a powerful testimony that swayed both the judge and the public. Ultimately, the court ruled that Thomas's actions, regardless of intent or intoxication, constituted non-consensual intercourse, and he was found guilty. The sentence handed down was one of the harshest ever seen for a figure of such public standing. A prison term that would ensure Thomas's removal from the fashion world and public life for years to come. Back in Los Angeles, the fallout was immediate. Forrester Creations faced backlash, with several international retailers cutting ties and protesters gathering outside the company's offices demanding accountability. Hope, once a close confidant and co-parent to Douglas, was devastated. She withdrew from public appearances and temporarily suspended the hope for the future line. Ridge, battling heartbreak and shame, struggled to maintain leadership at Forrester while keeping the media at bay. Even Eric, the patriarch, was forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that his grandson, for all his talent and charm, had once again brought disgrace to the family name. As Thomas began his prison sentence, the rest of the family attempted to pick up the pieces. His absence left a void in the company and in Douglas's life. The young boy, confused and traumatized, was shielded from the full extent of the truth, but he knew his father had done something wrong and was gone for a long time. Liam stepped in to provide stability, while Hope sought therapy for herself and Douglas, unsure how to explain the situation without inflicting further emotional damage. Steffi, grappling with guilt and fury, tried to manage the company's transition while raising her own children. She found herself resenting Thomas for once again placing the family in an impossible position, just when she thought they had moved past their years of dysfunction. Ridge's internal struggle intensified as he oscillated between defending Thomas as a father and condemning him as a man. He blamed himself for enabling Thomas's reckless behavior in the past, wondering if his refusal to acknowledge warning signs had allowed things to spiral this far. Brooke, on the other hand, offered a more detached perspective. She urged Ridge to stop making excuses and recognize that Thomas needed to face the consequences of his actions. Their differing stances caused friction in their already fragile relationship, bringing old wounds and betrayals to the surface. As time passed, the world moved on, but the scars remained. Forrester Creations implemented new ethical guidelines, increased corporate oversight, and launched a campaign aimed at supporting survivors of sexual assault. Though critics dismissed it as damage control, others saw it as a sincere attempt to make amends. Thomas's name was quietly removed from all marketing materials, and his design contributions were credited anonymously. Inside prison, Thomas underwent mandatory rehabilitation and therapy sessions, but his attempts at remorse were met with skepticism. While he expressed regret in court-mandated letters, many questioned whether his remorse stemmed from genuine self-reflection or from a desperate desire for redemption. The soap opera world, known for its resurrections and comebacks, now faced a new kind of reckoning. This wasn't just a scandal or a dramatic love triangle. This was real-life consequence woven into fictional drama, and it forced the audience to confront uncomfortable truths about power, privilege, and accountability. Fans were divided. Some mourned the loss of a character they had rooted for through years of transformation, while others applauded the show for taking a hard stance against sexual misconduct, even at the cost of a beloved legacy character. In the end, Thomas Forrester's downfall served as a stark reminder that no amount of charisma or talent could absolve someone of responsibility. His tragic arc, once full of potential and redemption, now stood as a cautionary tale. As the Forrester family braced for a future without him, the show pushed forward, exploring the fractures left in the wake of his absence. New dynamics emerged, fresh rivalries ignited, and Los Angeles buzzed with intrigue once again. But one thing remained clear. The shadow of Thomas's actions would loom large for years to come, reshaping not just his legacy, but the future of everyone he left behind. The courtroom transformed into a battlefield of data, algorithms, timestamps, and biometric patterns when the European prosecutor presented what would become one of the most pivotal pieces of evidence in the case against Thomas Forrester: a health tracking bracelet worn by the victim on the night of the alleged assault. In the sterile, scrutinizing light of the International Tribunal, the prosecutor unveiled a timeline reconstructed through digital forensics. The bracelet had recorded a sudden spike in heart rate just past midnight, a shift in geolocation that matched precisely with the coordinates of a luxury hotel in Nice, and a series of physiological anomalies that correlated with trauma. The data created a hauntingly precise narrative, a night gone terribly wrong, stripped of ambiguity by cold, numerical certainties. Prosecutors leaned heavily on this evidence to argue that the victim had been alert and aware up until the moment her vitals drastically changed, implying an event that triggered acute distress. More damning was the synchronized timestamp that aligned her biometric data with Thomas's hotel keycard swipe and the entry logs to his room, as confirmed by the hotel's internal security system. The room's lighting system, automated and tracked by smart tech, showed activation at the same moment the victim's pulse surged, adding a deeply unsettling layer to the reconstructed events. This was no longer just a case of conflicting testimony. It had evolved into what the media dubbed the technology trial of the decade, where wearable devices, smart locks, and cloud-based hotel logs became the new witnesses. But Thomas's defense team came prepared to launch their own digital counteroffensive. His attorney began by systematically dismantling the prosecution's narrative of intent by pointing to data from Thomas's smartphone, which showed dozens of missed calls, garbled texts, and complete usage drop-off around 10:48 p.m. more than 2 hours before the alleged assault. Then came the bombshell. Surveillance footage from the hotel hallway captured Thomas stumbling out of the elevator, slumped against the wall, and struggling to insert his keycard, his motor functions clearly impaired. A forensic toxicologist testified on behalf of the defense, confirming through toxicology data retrieved from Thomas's own wearable health tracker that his blood alcohol content had reached a level consistent with blackouts and unconsciousness. A bartender's signed testimony and itemized minibar receipts further backed up claims that Thomas had consumed excessive quantities of alcohol, potentially mixed with a sedative based on the pharmacological profile discovered in his bloodstream. His lawyer pressed the point relentlessly. If Thomas was not capable of forming coherent memories or maintaining physical control, how could he have had the conscious intent to violate anyone? This argument did not seek to excuse what happened. It sought to reframe the context and question the threshold of culpability under such extreme impairment. As the trial dragged on, the judge and jury became trapped in the heart of a moral, legal, and technological storm. Consent once considered a verbal or behavioral contract, was now being dissected in court using AI pattern recognition and forensic timestamps. The tech narrative became its own entity, shifting the emotional resonance of the trial from one of raw accusation to one of clinical probability. Expert witnesses debated over the nuances of heart rate variability. Could the spike recorded by the victim's bracelet indicate fear, or simply sexual arousal? Could an abrupt rise in blood pressure be interpreted as trauma if there was no accompanying scream, struggle, or visible injury on camera? Privacy advocates weighed in from afar, voicing concern over how intimate health data was being weaponized, not just to seek justice, but to construct an ironclad narrative that left no room for human nuance or misinterpretation. Outside the courtroom, the media frenzied over each new development. News anchors dissected courtroom diagrams like battle strategists. Legal pundits argued over admissibility standards for biometric data, and public opinion polarized sharply. On one side were those who believed the data told the truth of what the victim experienced, eliminating doubt where human memory and trauma might fail. On the other were those who feared the implications of allowing devices to testify in place of people, eroding the line between technological reliability and emotional truth. Social media hashtags trended across Europe and the United States, some supporting the victim's story of strength, others insisting Thomas was being digitally crucified by an algorithmic narrative that ignored the reality of his impaired state. Every ping from a smartwatch, every line of metadata became a thread in a digital tapestry no one could fully unravel. Back in Los Angeles, Ridge watched the proceedings from a continent away, growing more distraught with each revelation. At first, he had clung to the belief that Thomas, though flawed, was incapable of what was being alleged. But now, watching his son's fate hinge on pulse graphs and sleep cycle charts, Ridge was paralyzed by uncertainty. He couldn't reconcile the man he knew with the possibility that the absence of memory didn't mean the absence of action. Brooke, emotionally distanced but attentive, warned Ridge not to let paternal love blind him to uncomfortable truths. Steffi, overwhelmed by the family's disintegration and the backlash facing Forrester Creations, chose silence. Hope had already distanced herself, refusing to bring Douglas into the courtroom spectacle or allow him to visit Thomas until the verdict was clear. The final arguments echoed like thunderclaps in the marble halls of the European courthouse. The prosecutor summarized the biometric evidence with a chilling assertion: the body remembers what the mind forgets. The defense countered with a plea for understanding. This was not a predator. This was a man lost in his own body, rendered unconscious by his own reckless choices, not by malice. The verdict came swiftly after days of deliberation. Guilty, not on the charge of premeditated rape, but on the charge of sexual assault without affirmative consent, under the jurisdiction's strict statutes regarding intoxication and incapacitation. The court found that while Thomas may not have acted with malicious intent, his lack of awareness did not absolve him of responsibility for an encounter that occurred without valid, sober, enthusiastic consent. He was sentenced to a prison term that reflected both the seriousness of the crime and the court's recognition of the complexities of the case. It was a ruling that attempted balance, acknowledging the victim's trauma while also accounting for Thomas's impaired state. But in the court of public opinion, there was no such balance. Some believed the sentence was too light, others thought it too harsh. But the real consequence was the irreversible damage to Thomas's reputation and the shattering of his family's belief in redemption. The fashion house of Forrester Creations scrambled to distance itself from the scandal, issuing apologies, pausing collaborations, and canceling upcoming launches that bore Thomas's name. Lawyers negotiated settlements behind closed doors. Ridge withdrew from the public eye, unable to lead while grappling with the unbearable question: what if his son was both a victim of his own downfall and the perpetrator of someone else's nightmare? As Thomas began serving his sentence, the technology that had once made him a star designer, immersive design tablets, digital pattern mapping, automated textile machines, now stood as a cruel irony. It was technology that had elevated his creativity, and it was technology that helped condemn him. In his isolation, Thomas began to write, not fashion designs, but a journal chronicling the night he couldn't remember, the trial he could never forget, and the future he no longer believed he deserved. And somewhere in Europe, a young woman tried to rebuild her life, her trust in herself, and her belief that the truth, told in data or tears, had finally been